Just copy down what's in red. Nope, don't copy the bullet points underneath. All right, sorry about that, guys. All right, so you're taking a look at the focus question here. How did the Compromise of 1850 cause more problems in the country? So I do want to talk about life as a plantation slave owner. All right, I will do that in a second. But let's just go back to yesterday to kind of recall what we were doing. We were looking at the compromises that kind of avoided conflict in our country between the North and the South. All right. So this is kind of how our country looked in terms of who was free, who was slave after the Compromise of 1850. We have the free states here, okay, located all the way from California, pretty much all in the north. The South has probably some less states at this point. Okay. Yeah. So the slave trade was banned in Washington, D.C. Now, that's not something you need to know. I just want you to get a sense of how this kind of looks, all right? But the thing that the South got was, because obviously there's more free territories than free states, the South got this stronger fugitive slave law, which we kind of alluded to yesterday a little bit. So we're going to focus in on that in a little bit. Now, there's never a great time for me to really go through and teach life as a plantation slave. If you don't have the sense and understanding that life as a plantation slave was just really, really horrible, you haven't been paying attention much to social studies or what's going on. I mean, everyone should understand how bad it was to be a slave. I struggle at times to teach this because there's only so many ways I could show you how bad it was. Okay, everyone should have the understanding of how bad it was. You know, same thing when I teach how, you know, life as a soldier was during certain wars. It's not an easy thing for me to just say, you know, it's really, really bad and then that's it. Okay, we could spend months on life as a plantation slave. We could spend months on life as a soldier. Okay, it's crazy, crazy stuff. I encourage you, if you're really interested on the actual ins and outs of how life was as a plantation slave, to really go into details. All we need to know are the basics, okay? And you should be fine for any type of Regents class, but obviously this can go into a lot more detail if you choose to. I often get asked questions, you know, how come in schools we don't talk about the horrors of slavery? And it's like, I try my best to, all right? It is really bad, but it is more of a 7th grade thing. All right, so we're not going to spend too much time with it. I just hope you guys have this general understanding of how bad life as a slave was. I think you guys probably get it at this point. Why was slavery so horrific? For many reasons. Number one, they had very limited freedoms. They didn't have the rights really to do anything. They had no time on their own. They were pretty much told to how to live their lives, and they had no freedoms to go around how they wanted to go do that. All right. Most would work out in the farm plantations. Okay, if you were in the South, probably 80% of them, male, female, would work on the farms. Okay, out in the field. All right, there would be some slaves that would work inside as a servant. It would be maybe an easier job to some capacity, but like not an easy job. All right, obviously slaves don't get paid. No, Lizmel, don't copy it down. Just going over it. When you're a slave, if you misbehave, if you do something wrong, okay, you don't get reprimanded verbally, you get beaten. All right, the biggest way was whipping or lashing a particular person for misbehaviors on the back with a whip. This is pretty, you know, cruel stuff, but this is the way the slaves were usually punished. Many slaves were not allowed to read or try and be educated. Okay, very select few were able to become self-educated. One person you'll learn tomorrow is Frederick Douglass. But many were not able to, because if they were caught, they would actually be beaten, okay, and reprimanded and, put on a tighter leash, so to speak. So if they were caught, they would lead to beatings. Families were often torn apart at slave auctions. This is a huge thing you'll see a little bit later on, I think next week, when a lot of the families, kids were separated from their mothers and fathers. Some of just the saddest stuff. The whole idea of keeping the institution of slavery strong was separating families. If your family is no longer with you, now you're just succumb to the master, basically. All right, if you're there with your family, in some ways, it's a lot easier for you to try and raise your family there. Now, some slave owners and plantation owners were nice; they would allow families, but many did not. All right, so if you had a child that was born, they were usually sold into auction, and you were never seen again. All right, and this is a very, very sad thing. So we'll watch a very quick video on the life as a plantation slave, very basic stuff, and that's going to nicely lead into why so many slaves try to escape slavery. All right, if you can't already guess the reasons why. All right, so give me a second to set that up.
Life for an African American held as a slave in the southern United States between the years 1619 and 1860 was one of extreme hardship and injustice. African Americans living as slaves had no freedoms of their own, owned no property, received no pay, were beaten or whipped for disobedience, and were bought and sold like animals. The large plantations in the South survived on slave labor. African Americans worked the fields, tended to the animals and farm chores, and worked in the plantation homes as cooks, housekeepers, seamstresses, servants, and nannies, receiving nothing in return but inadequate food and shelter. African Americans who were held as house slaves had somewhat better treatment than those who worked in the fields, though African Americans who worked in the plantation homes were treated more as pets than people. African American families could be split up and sold at auction depending on the needs of their owners. A large plantation in the southern states could have as many as 100 African Americans working the day-to-day chores. African Americans were controlled by the overseer who woke them at dawn and often worked them until dark. African Americans who didn't obey the overseer could be badly mistreated and beaten. Slave quarters were built separately and away from the main plantation house. These quarters were usually one room, dirt floor cabins with a fireplace. In some cases, African Americans living as slaves were allowed to have small gardens, pigs, and chickens by their cabins. This helped to give them healthier diets, but often the overseers left them very little time in the day to tend these gardens. An African American born as a slave on a plantation could live out his or her whole life there. They might never see the world outside the plantation boundaries. Their days would be dedicated to serving their owner, never receiving payment or freedom.
Okay, and they don't even really go into the beatings part. They just go into the general life as a slave. There's absolutely no freedom whatsoever. Okay, and the way I try and explain it to students is, as a student, okay, it's like going to school from 6 a.m. to 7 p.m. You go home, you go to bed, and you do that every day for the rest of your life. There's absolutely no freedom. It's extremely, extremely sad. And this is not even the beatings part. Like, this isn't like getting misbehaved. Just literally living your life day to day, being told what to do. It's dehumanizing in every sense of the word. All right, so as bad as life as a slave is, okay, this is not a major, major topic on the Regents. Okay, it's just something we need to be familiar with. I do encourage you, if you're passionate about this stuff, to obviously go into more detail, because this is obviously some of the worst stuff in American history. All right, moving on though. All right, we're now going to look at why people tried to escape slavery. So yesterday we took some time and discussed what it meant to be a fugitive. A fugitive is another word for a runaway slave, or a runaway, someone who's running away. A fugitive slave is someone who is trying to escape slavery, all right, and is leaving their particular master. So please copy down what's in red. All right, we're going to look at how this law strengthens slavery in the South and basically strengthens slavery throughout the entire country. All right, so I'll give you a minute to do that, and then I'll talk over what these two laws are, though you're just writing down the second one in red. Again, guys, very crucial to stay on top of all your work, to make sure you're focused with it and staying on top of the notes. I know it's very tough, especially because I'm not there looking over you as you take your notes. The importance of it. All right, so please make sure you keep doing it. The Fugitive Slave Law really came out for the first time in 1793, right after the Constitution came out. But honestly, guys, it was a law that no one really listened to. It said that any slaves that escaped their masters needed to be returned back to their masters. This is like something, though, that wasn't really as strong. All right, no one really listened, especially in the North. So the idea was, prior to 1850, if you were a slave and you were able to escape slavery, and I'm not saying that was easy to do, but if you were able to escape slavery and you were to make it to the North, you were essentially free. Okay, you really didn't have much to worry about. After this Fugitive Slave Law of 1850, if you tried to escape slavery and you got to the North, there's a very little chance you're going to stay a free person for very long, and I'll explain why. It said that any slaves that escaped their masters needed to return back to their masters. That's not a change. But now, even in the northern free states, it's going to hold the people in the North accountable to also report on a runaway slave. And a big group is going to come out called slave catchers or slave hunters. Okay, so I'll just write this down here so you get used to the word. Slave catchers, slave hunters. These two particular groups of people became very strong after the Fugitive Slave Law of 1850. It actually was one of the best paying jobs in the United States. Okay, you're going to see the prices that slave catchers would basically work for, and they made tons of money. So this was a very lucrative job, despite it being not the best thing. Now, this is the first time, but probably not the last time, I'm going to give this example so you really understand. Okay, when I was in college, okay, I had a professor when I asked this question, how did people see a African American, see a slave, okay, look at them, see that's a human being, and then kind of treat them this way? Okay, if you knew someone was a slave and they escaped to the North, how do you treat them this way? And it was during our discussions on the Fugitive Slave Law I asked this question, so I like giving this story now. And I want to focus in on number 2. Anyone that helps a slave escape or does not report to police that there is a suspected runaway slave will face a money fine or jail time. So if someone knocks on my door as a fugitive slave, okay, says they need help, okay, if you help them, you go to jail. If you don't help them and also don't report it to the police, you go to jail. So basically, this law was forcing people in the North and the South to basically snitch on and give information on where fugitive slaves were. So in college, I asked the question, it's a tough situation, but obviously you see human beings in help and need, wouldn't you want to help them? And then my college professor, his name was Dr. Morgan. He was a pretty smart guy, but he explained it to me in a way that I understand, okay, today. He goes, all right, let's take your thoughts off. Maheen, kinda, yeah. Let's take your thoughts of how you think in this present time era and think how someone would in 1850, all right? So he gave me this example that still lasts for me today. He said to me, he goes, what do you think of squirrels? I just looked at him like, what do you mean? What do I think of squirrels? I mean, they're fine. They're animals. They run around. They don't bother me. I have no problem with them. He goes, okay, fine. Neither do I. Do you think squirrels should have equal rights as you? I go, no. Do you think they have the right to vote? No. Do you think they should be treated the same as you? I go, no. I mean, they should be treated decently, but I don't think they should be treated as a human being. He goes, that is exactly how a person back in the 1850s thought of a slave or thought of a black person. The way you think of squirrels is the way a plantation owner or a slave hunter or a regular run-of-the-mill person thought of a black person in the United States back in history. So he explained to me, and it always stood out to me, he says, if you don't have the same mindset of treating squirrels the exact same way you want to be treated, then you have to understand that's how people thought back in history. Now, obviously, we know that today is wrong, but since you have that particular thought, he asked me, he said, Do you think you would help out a squirrel if that meant you would go to jail and leave your family for years? And then obviously my answer was a little bit different. So people in the North were put into this constant tough situation. Are you going to help out someone and risk getting your family in trouble, risk getting you in trouble, if that meant you were going to go to jail? And that also meant, you know what, at the same point, you're going to be helping someone who you, in your eyes, didn't really help. So it helped me understand the thought process and how it was different back in history. Now, this is a few years ago. All right, my mindset has kind of changed, obviously, from just looking from a present day perspective to looking at a historical perspective, recognizing that thought process is being wrong. But at the same time, ladies and gentlemen, just understanding why things like this happen the way it did. Go ahead, Josh, ask your question.
So how would abolitionists have to deal with slaves during this time with the fugitive slave law?
It made their job a lot harder. But in some ways, you're going to learn tomorrow that things like the fugitive slave law made abolitionists even more hungry to try and end slavery. So we'll talk about that more tomorrow, but it made their job harder without question. All right. With that also being said, okay, we have this other situation happening here. Not only are you dealing with, okay, you can go to jail, you also are posed in front of you, as you're about to learn, situations where you can get money, all right, for putting for helping get the slave owners put away. Okay, so not the slave owners, the slaves. If you were to help out the slave owners, and you would be paid money with rewards if you were to catch a slave. All right, so it's a very tough situation. All right, what you're doing now is you are going to look at this document here. All right, and you're going to answer. I'll give you about 9 minutes to 10:50 to do it. Answer these questions based off of document A and document B. All right, what is a primary source? That's a review question. Questions 2 and 3 as well. And then you're going to answer questions 1, 2, and then I have an added one to make it a little bit harder. All right. So you're going to do this on the Google Doc. Okay. I give you 2 review questions from yesterday, Regents questions, so you could just highlight the correct answer. And then everyone else, you guys are going to work on questions 1, 2, 3, questions 1, 2, and then I even share a third question here that kind of puts you into that perspective of a person living through the 1850s and a fugitive slave knocks on your door. What would you do? Okay, what would you do if you were in that situation? All right, so I'll give you about 8, 9 minutes to work on this. I'll be taking attendance, and then we'll come back together because we have one more slide of notes and one more thing we have to learn for today as well. Sure. Milagros, dude, you're not here? We are working on the fugitive slave law PDF, okay, and we're answering the questions that go along with it in the Google Doc. Okay, no problem. So just answer the questions based off of the PDF called the fugitive slave law. Abigail, yes, we'll go over the 2 Regents questions at 10:50. No, hold off on the Nebraska one until we go over some of the notes. We'll go over it, Mohammed, but it's a term we would have talked about earlier in the year and then in 7th grade, so it's a review question. If you don't know it, skip it. We'll go over it. Or just look it up. Take 2 more minutes, or if you don't finish, it's okay. Not a big deal. Just take 2 more minutes to try and get as much done as you can. Okay, guys and girls, finish up your last sentence, and then let's go over this. So first, some review from yesterday. The first question here, the rapid westward migration caused by the discovery of gold in California and the Mexican-American War led directly to the correct answer would be 2, the adoption of the Compromise of 1850. And then from yesterday, both the Missouri Compromise and the Compromise of 1850 settled conflicts between the North and the South over the correct answer would be 1. Okay, new states are coming into the country. Are they going to be free? Are they going to be slave? What are we going to do? Okay, let's go now into the questions. Okay, so what is a primary source? All right, so Muhammad had the question. This is the review. A primary source is something that is made or created, that is something that you are looking at from the time period that we're studying. So if you look at these two documents, this poster and this poster, if you were to transport back into 1850, Muhammad, you would see these two posters around, okay? You would not see, one second, you would not see my textbook. This textbook would not be around in 1850. This is a secondary source. So primary sources, which are a lot of things you see on DBQs, are going to be things that are going to deal with sources from the time that we're studying. All right. Poster A is obviously expressing that the slave hunter is giving a warning to the fugitive slaves that if you try and escape, the slave hunter is going to be coming for you. Many fugitive slaves, when they escape now, they can't go to the north. Where do they have to go? They have to go to Mexico. They have to go to Canada, most likely. Canada was a lot more likely of an area than Mexico at this time. All right, and they're warning the fugitive slaves, even though a lot of them couldn't read, there were posters around letting the fugitive slaves know that if you try and leave, okay, the slave hunters will get you. All right, and then you see poster B for question 3. There's a $150 reward, okay, to catch the fugitive slave Tom. A description of what he looks like. Kind of, to be honest, ladies and gentlemen, this is $150. That's a lot of money back then. It's thousands of dollars in today's money. So you could see how slave hunting and slave catching was a huge thing, a huge job that a lot of people had at the time. All right, so these sources are pretty straightforward. All right, what I would like to do now is move back into our focus of Compromise of 1850. So this was problem number 1, fugitive slave law. The next problem is going to be the fact that now going forward, we talked about this, so number 2 here, territories are going to decide through popular sovereignty, through voting, if they're going to be a slave state or a free state or free territory or slave territory. Now, at the time, the compromise, that looked like a good idea. We're going to see how this is going to turn into a not so good idea through something called the Kansas and Nebraska Act. All right, so this is the last slide you're copying down. Please copy down the Kansas and Nebraska Act in red, and then we will discuss a few things. Okay, so let's go over a couple things. What was the Kansas-Nebraska Act? So this was a separate law passed by our Congress to set up 2 separate territories within our country. Okay, we had what's called over here called the unorganized territory, and we wanted to make it a little bit more straightforward, breaking down the 2 different areas and 2 different territories. So this created a territory called Kansas and a territory called Nebraska, hence the name, the Kansas-Nebraska Act, pretty straightforward. Now, based off of the Compromise of 1850, both territories now needed to decide if they wanted to add slaves or not. All right. Now here's the problem. The two territories had very few amount of people. So here's what a lot of people decided to do. People from Missouri, Illinois, California, Ohio, Kentucky, they said it would be more beneficial if we voted for in Kansas and Nebraska. So they took their those people, those families, they moved to Kansas and Nebraska just to vote during the election. So you had a lot of people going to Kansas and Nebraska, going to vote on if they wanted slavery or not. So many people who weren't even from the area showed up at these elections. Now, this is a problem for a couple of different reasons. One, people that are from the territory are not really getting their full representation, and other people from other areas are trying to influence the election on if there should be slavery or not. Now, when you have a lot of pro-slavery and anti-slavery people, when you have a lot of Northerners and Southerners coming into this area, there's going to be major problems. All right? So the elections themselves were a little bit of a crapshoot because a lot of people voting are not actually from the area. But what you need to know about is the actual violence that took place. Now, up until this point, there's been a lot of bad talking. There's been a lot of bad things said. There's been no actual violence, ladies and gentlemen. This is the first time where violence actually takes place, and it's going to take place in mostly Kansas. And it's going to lead to something called Bleeding Kansas. There's going to be many riots, many violent confrontations between pro-slavery and anti-slavery people in the territory of Kansas when the elections are being held. There's going to be a lot of voter intimidation. There's going to be a lot of violence that takes place within the areas. All right. So when we have the votes take place, if you look here, this area of the Nebraska and Kansas need to basically vote through that. Yes, Aura John Brown was one of them. We are going to talk about that more tomorrow when we look more at John Brown and the abolitionist movement. But he was one of those people that were there kind of leading some of the violence in what some people say is a good thing and some people say is a bad thing, depending on their perspective. All right. But this Kansas-Nebraska Act came into play and was a little bit of a not so good situation. All right. So because of the Compromise of 1850, which many people thought was a good idea to keep, let people vote on how they want to have slavery or not, it ended up becoming such a backfire because all this violence broke out at this time because of the Kansas-Nebraska Act. All right. There's one more little map I want to show you, okay, which is this one here. Now this kind of comes out and shows you where is going to be free states, where is going to be slave states. And as you can tell, this Kansas-Nebraska Act, Kansas and Nebraska eventually voted to have slavery. The slavery people that came and voted, there was a lot more of them, so they got to vote it as a slave territory. This led to riots across the states, and that's going to lead to the formation of the Republican Party, which we'll talk about a couple days from now. Okay? So what I want us to do now is I want us to go back to our Google Doc. Okay, and if you scroll down at the bottom of the Google Doc. Oh, I didn't see Anicia have this. Anicia, are you here? She's not here, right? Yeah, okay. I thought maybe she popped in. Okay. So with that being said, all right, sharing this tab again. You're now going to look at the Kansas-Nebraska app. So you scroll down a little bit, you'll notice a total of 7 questions. 3 on page 2, 4 on page 3. All right. So you go to the reading. Okay, you have about 8 minutes. You can get it done if you move quickly. All right. The first page right here is going to focus on some of the things we talked about. Okay, and then you're just going to have about 3 review questions here. All right. And then you're going to actually go into violence that takes place within our government. 2 Congress people, Charles Brooks and Preston Summers. Preston Brooks and Charles Sumner. Okay, I mixed that up. Sorry about that. These 2 people are actually going to get into a fight within our when the violence breaks out. Okay, and then you have 4 questions here that go along with it. Okay, so you guys can work on that. Yes, Sanjita, I'll go back to that slide. Give me 1 second. Okay. But everyone else, you guys could work on those questions. All right, and this is the notes if you need towards the end here. I recognize many of you will not finish. That's okay. Take another 2 more minutes and we'll do the Regents questions before we get out of here. Okay, guys and girls, so we're going to just finish with about 2 or 3 Regents questions. As per usual, you can just write in the chat once you see the answer to these questions. If you're not finished with the Google Doc, that's okay. Just finish it up by the end of the night and then turn it in for a grade. All right, so here we go. In the 1850s, why did many runaway slaves go to Canada? All right, why did they leave the entire country and not just go to the north? Okay, 2 is correct. The Fugitive Slave Act kept them at risk in the United States. So since it was such a dangerous law, now they had to, if they really wanted to escape slavery, they needed to go to the entire, get out of the entire country. All right. Which heading best completes the partial outline shown in the partial outline below? So what would be the best title for these 3 topics? Right, so the Missouri Compromise, Compromise of 1850, Kansas-Nebraska Act. What would be the best title for these 3 things? Excellent. Those are my Monday lesson people, right? Because I had a bunch of people, you know, I had about like 7 or 8 people that didn't watch that lesson on Monday. Okay, 1 is the best answer. Okay, that's the rise of sectionalism. That's the division between different areas. And the last one here. In the Compromise of 1850 and the Kansas-Nebraska Act of 1854, popular sovereignty was proposed as a way to what? Three is correct. I will see you tomorrow. I think I see everyone first period. So bright and early, make sure you're out of bed and ready to go. I'll see you first period. Bye-bye.